One's always got to remember the complex way in which Jeremy Hunt has reintroduced us all to the joys of spoonerism. It isn't a spoonerism of his name, Jeremy Hunt. If you swap the two letters of his first name and his second name, you don't get anything alarming at all, except for the possibility of making a joke about a junta. But when Mr. Hunt was the minister in charge of the digital culture, media, and sport, in other words, when he was the culture secretary, the radio, if I remember correctly, I think it was the Today program, fell foul of the potential spoonerism there, which has now caught yet another person out. Nina Hussein was speaking to a correspondent in Greater Manchester when she mispronounced the Chancellor's name, and she corrected it immediately. But it's not the first time that people have had problems with Mr. Hunt's name. Victoria Derbyshire also had problems with Mr. Hunt's name. Anyway, that's not what I thought I would talk about now. I was very entertained to read an article in the Independent this evening about the Bishop of Rochester in 1531. Absolutely true. I remember the story vividly because it tickled my fancy when I was first told it. I think I must have been told it when I was at school, and how he had thrown a dinner party, and the king was there, and one of the guests at the dinner party became ill, and suspicion fell on the cook, a person called Richard Roos, and Henry VIII demanded an Act of Parliament that declared that poisoning was treason, the penalty for which was to be boiled alive, and that Roos was guilty of this crime. No trial took place, and Roos was duly boiled in Smithfield in public. He was publicly boiled. And the interesting point that the article makes is that there are two laws now going through in an attempt to establish the law by diktat rather than by a criminal investigation. The first one is, of course, the fact that Rwanda is a safe and reasonable country, and that people who are sent to Rwanda are guaranteed their safety, when no such thing can actually be confirmed by the government. Rwanda has a history of slaughtering refugees, a recent history of slaughtering refugees, has covered up the attempted inquiry, if there ever was an inquiry. No publication of that inquiry has taken place. And it wasn't just one incident, it was at least two incidents of refugees being gunned down because they were concerned they weren't being given the food which should have been supplied by the United Nations. So at what point does the Rwandan military step in to silence those refugees who we send there, who protest that they're not getting the food that Britain has provided? That's one bill which is going through, and the other one is the Post Office Horizon System Compensation Bill, which overturns the sluggish nature of the courts and of the post office. We're now told that the post office is in no fit state to control the remuneration system and the compensation. Well, of course it isn't. Of course it hasn't been. That surely has been known since 2019, when it was formally established that the post office was to blame for all of this mess. I don't understand why it takes so long for a government composed of people who have been elected because they are mindful of what's going on in the country, who seem utterly and consistently to be blind to the reality. The reality is that the Rwanda project is doomed. The reality is that the post office has failed. Absolutely. The post office was the institution that you could most trust in the in your average town or village, and it's now a den of miscreants. And I'm not talking about the postmasters or the postmistresses, I'm talking about the management. The management is deeply, deeply suspicious, and their efforts to cover up their mistakes cry out for vengeance. And the government, as ever, tries to confound reality by mixing up the word compensation with restitution, with prosecution. It doesn't know which one it's doing. And investigation. There is a natural order to this. First of all, you pay back what you took. You apologize for stealing. And then you think of compensation for all the years that you have denied the postmasters and the postmistresses their livelihood. And then you look at prosecution. These are different processes, but the government is trying very hard with a sleight of hand to pretend that it's all one. It's as pernicious as trying to define something into law, to trying to say that something is the case simply because you're the government and you have the power to make it so. But the fact that you have power doesn't mean you have moral authority. Nobody in this country has moral authority to say something which is wrong. In fact, if I tell somebody to go and do something which is morally wrong, they have a perfect right not to do it, even if I were the highest authority in the land. They have a perfect right not to do something which is morally wrong. And that is enshrined in our law. That's a principle of it. You cannot command somebody to do something that is wrong. It's also enshrined in canon law. You cannot command somebody to do something which is wrong. And equally, you take responsibility for what you've done. You can't say, oh, I did it because I was told to do it. That's an excuse which was thrown out in the Nuremberg trials. So the Lords has an important constitutional role to ensure that bad laws get stopped. And it's used that constitutional role in the last couple of days to stop this Rwanda nonsense. And the Independent rather cleverly points out that it is very similar to the Archbishop and the Richard Roos affair. Very similar. Henry VIII didn't stop there, of course. He then redefined his religion. That caused no end of problems. That wasn't simply something that took place overnight because he choked on a chicken bone. No, that was something where he was dividing Britain from mainland Europe religiously. Does that possibly ring a bell? That was the Brexit of his day. The Reformation, we now call it. But that led to years of religious war. When you change something so fundamental as our relationship with the rest of the continent, as John Donne said, no man is an island. We are part of the whole. And if we try and define ourselves as so independent, we are just a clod of mud. But we are dependent on the whole. When we try and break free, we are defying nature, we are defying reality. And yes, I entirely agree, Europe was in need of reform. I think the shock of Brexit has probably started some of that reform. I'm sorry that we're not central to that reform. I'm sorry that we're not able to participate in that reform, because the health of Europe is as important to us even if we are not part of Europe, even if we are in a Brexit, it's as important to us now as if we were part of Europe. A healthy Europe helps a healthy Britain. And poison. Well, I think I think the cook, Richard Roos, died a terrible and an unnecessary death simply because his pudding was inedible. But you know, the days of celebrity cooks. It's now they're just cancelled on TV. At the time of Henry VIII, it was a life-threatening job to cook for the rich and the famous.